They say grief comes in waves. For me, it came in passwords. Every login was a goodbye. Bank accounts, insurance, social media, each one a tiny erasure of the life we'd built together. But then I found it. A single password scribbled in his old notebook. One I didn't recognize. I thought it was just another account to close. I didn't know it would open him the parts of him I never met, the truth I never asked for, and the marriage I thought I understood. My name is Claire Matthews, and I used to think I knew how a life was built one morning at a time, one dinner conversation at a time, one quiet Sunday beside the same man who made me laugh more often than he made me cry. I was wrong, of course. Life isn't built like that. It's not even built in years. It's built in truths, and when those truths start to crack, time means nothing. I'm 40 years old, a teacher by profession, a widow by accident, or at least that's what I used to tell people. Now, I'm not sure what to call myself. Wife of a stranger, maybe. Keeper of a secret I never asked to find. It's been 7 months since Ethan died. A heart attack, the doctor said. Sudden, merciless, clinical. The kind of death that leaves no explanation, no warning, just silence and a house full of echoes. He was 43, healthy, successful, kind. Or so everyone thought, or maybe that's just what I let them think. When the funeral was over and the casseroles stopped coming, I found myself doing the thing no one warns you about the digital afterlife cleanup. The paperwork, the passwords, the endless emails. Death used to mean burying a body. Now it means closing an inbox. Every account felt like a ghost I had to delete. It was on a gray Thursday afternoon that I opened his desk drawer for the first time since he'd gone. His things were still there exactly as he left them. His old leather wallet, a silver watch, a few pens that no longer worked, and a small notebook he used for work passwords. I remember smiling faintly at his handwriting, neat, deliberate, like a man trying to stay in control even of chaos. There were the usual things: bank login, Gmail, insurance portal, Netflix, all crossed out with dates beside them. And then, at the very bottom, a word that didn't match anything: echoes. No website, no context, just echoes and a password beside it: Remember Me 1981. Something about it stopped me. I can't explain why. Maybe it was the word remember. Maybe it was the year 1981, his birth year. Or maybe I was just tired of deleting him from existence. Whatever it was, I typed it in. At first, nothing happened. Then, a blank white screen appeared with a single folder titled Echoes. I clicked it. Inside were dozens of text files, each dated, each titled with a single word. Dream, mirror, Claire, another life, forgive. My hand froze on the mouse. For a long moment, I just stared. It looked like a diary, but Ethan never kept one, at least not that I knew of. My husband was the kind of man who believed in facts, not feelings. He managed investments, not emotions. He didn't write, he calculated. That was his way of keeping control. So what was this? I opened the first file, Dream. It was short. Just a few sentences. I dreamed of the ocean again, the same one from before. Claire was there, but she didn't know me. She kept asking who I was. I lied and said I was someone else. She believed me. I remember blinking, trying to make sense of it. It didn't sound like Ethan, not the Ethan I knew. He wasn't poetic. He wasn't cryptic. And what did he mean? From before? Before what? I told myself it was just a fragment, some unfinished writing project, maybe therapy homework. He'd gone to counseling once after his mother died. Maybe this was part of that. But then I clicked the next entry. Sometimes I think I invented the version of myself she loves. It's easier that way. Easier than admitting that I never really wanted the life we built. My throat went dry. The cursor blinked back at me like a heartbeat. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, washed in pale afternoon light, the kind of stillness that makes you hear your own thoughts too loudly. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about every moment of our marriage, the dinners, the laughter, the small arguments, the vacations. Were they all real, or were they part of this invention he wrote about? When morning came, I told myself I wouldn't open that folder again, that I'd let him rest. But curiosity doesn't rest. It just waits quietly, patiently, until you run out of reasons not to look. By the third day, I was back at his desk. The next file was titled Claire. She still makes coffee the same way. Too strong, too early. I watch her sometimes when she doesn't know. I wonder if she'd still love me if she saw who I am when I'm not being her husband. I read it 3 times. When I'm not being her husband. What did that mean? Was he pretending? Was he someone else literally? Figuratively? It was like staring into a reflection that didn't match my own. And then something shifted in me. The grief that had dulled into background noise for months suddenly sharpened into anger. Anger that he could still control my emotions even from the grave. I started opening the files one after another, reading his thoughts like a detective piecing together a crime. There's someone who knows the real me. I never meant to fall in love again. I didn't lie to hurt her. I lied because she needed the version of me that could stay. Every entry felt like a confession, not quite an affair, not quite a crime, but something in between. An emotional betrayal that didn't need a body to exist. I tried to find this someone he wrote about. A name, a clue, anything. But the diary never mentioned her directly. Just fragments, initials, vague details, the smell of a place, the warmth of a hand. It was maddening, like trying to assemble a puzzle with half the pieces burned away. Days passed. My routine fell apart. I stopped answering messages, stopped grading papers, stopped cooking. My world shrank to that laptop screen and the words he'd left behind. And the more I read, the less I recognized myself. Because somewhere in those entries, I wasn't just reading about Ethan, I was reading about us. Our memories, rewritten through his eyes, twisted, softened, sometimes erased entirely. She doesn't remember the fight. Good. I made sure she wouldn't. Some things are better buried. That one nearly made me drop the computer. She doesn't remember the fight. What fight? I remembered arguments, yes, but none that felt erased. Was he implying something else? Manipulation? Gaslighting? I started doubting my own recollections, scanning my past like a corrupted file. It's a strange thing, realizing your memories might not be yours alone, that someone else could have shaped them through words, silence, or omission. I began to wonder what else I didn't know. Then, near the bottom of the folder, I found a subfolder titled Voice. Inside were 6 audio files. The first one was labeled Test 1. I hesitated, then pressed play. His voice filled the room familiar, calm, intimate. The same voice that used to read me bedtime stories when I couldn't sleep. If you're hearing this, it means you found it. You always were curious. I didn't mean for you to, but maybe it's better this way. You deserve the truth, even if it changes everything. I froze. It wasn't a journal. It wasn't therapy. It was for me. The sound of his breath through the speaker made my skin prickle. I felt him in the room, close enough to touch, but unreachable. I let the recording play. You once asked me if I ever regretted anything. I said no. That was a lie. I've been lying most of my life. Not because I wanted to, because I didn't know how to stop. And then, a pause. A long, heavy silence before he spoke again. There are things about me you were never meant to see. Parts I buried long before we met. But you can't build love on half-truths forever. Eventually, it collapses. The recording ended abruptly, like he'd been interrupted mid-thought. I sat there, heart pounding, replaying the words again and again. There are things about me you were never meant to see. What things? A secret life? Another identity? Another woman? I wanted to call someone my sister, my friend, anyone, but what would I say? Hey, my dead husband left a digital confession about a life I didn't know existed? No, some secrets you have to face alone. The next file was named Voice 2, The Beginning. I pressed play. I was 24 when I stopped being myself. It's easier to explain this way. Maybe you'll understand, maybe you won't. But the truth has a sound, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Then, a click. Silence again. Like he'd meant to continue, but never did. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just a diary. It was a breadcrumb trail. And I'd already taken the first step. I closed the laptop, stood up, and looked around our house, our pictures, our memories, our life. Everything felt staged, like props in a play that had ended long ago. For years, I thought I was living a love story. Now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe it was a mystery. Maybe it was a confession. Or maybe it was a goodbye that took too long to reach me. But I knew one thing I couldn't stop now. I had to know who Ethan really was, even if it meant losing who I was in the process. Grief has a strange rhythm. It doesn't fade. It mutates. At first, it was loneliness. Then, after I found that folder, it became curiosity. And now, it's obsession. The kind that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. with your laptop glowing like an open wound. I spent days going through every file inside Echoes. The more I read, the more I realized Ethan wasn't writing to anyone. He was writing for himself. Or maybe for the person he couldn't be in front of me. Every entry had a tone, calm, analytical, almost like a man dissecting his own life. But beneath that, there was fear. The kind that hides behind intellect. The kind that knows it's running out of places to hide. The folder Voice haunted me. I listened to those first 2 recordings until I could repeat every breath. He said there were things I wasn't meant to see. What things? When I finally dared to open Voice 3, it started differently. No introduction this time. No calm tone. Just his voice strained, quiet, almost trembling. There was someone before you, Claire. I told you about her, but not everything. Her name wasn't really Anna. That was the name she used when she disappeared. The truth is, I was the reason she did. I remember my whole body going cold. He'd mentioned Anna before, his college girlfriend. He told me she left suddenly, no closure, no explanation. He said it broke his heart for a while, but that he'd moved on. We'd even joked about it once, about how people change names after heartbreak. But I never imagined it meant something darker. He continued, I made a choice that night, one I thought I could live with. I built a new version of myself. I thought if I changed everything, my job, my name, my history, I could forget. And for years I did. That was when I stopped breathing, changed his name. I paused the recording, staring at the screen like it might explain itself. But there it was, the admission, plain as daylight. Ethan Matthews wasn't his real name. I ran to the filing cabinet, grabbed every document, birth certificate, degree, marriage license, all in the same name, all perfectly real, too real. It was as if he'd lived his life under a costume stitched so neatly no one ever thought to look beneath it. My mind spun. If he'd changed his name, what else had he changed? Was his family real? His past? I looked at our wedding photo on the mantel. He was smiling, that same easy smile that used to melt me. Now it felt rehearsed. I pressed play again. I wanted to tell you, but by the time I thought I could, we'd already built too much together. You'd made me better, or at least made me seem better. You saw someone I wanted to be, and I couldn't ruin that. It was almost tender, the way he said it, almost convincing. But underneath it was something I couldn't ignore: guilt. If you ever find this, it means I didn't get the chance to fix it. Maybe you'll hate me. Maybe you'll understand. But if you go looking for the truth, Claire, be careful. Some things are buried for a reason. That was the end of the file. I sat there in silence, the cursor blinking again like a pulse that refused to stop. Be careful. That wasn't something you say to your wife unless there's danger. But danger from what or who? I searched the diary files again, scrolling through names, dates, anything that could hint at this before. Most of the older entries were cryptic, like coded messages. Then I found one titled Mirror 2012, the year we met. She doesn't know I've used this name before. The documents look real enough. Nobody checks as long as you seem honest. The trick is to stay consistent. Lies only fall apart when you forget which version you told. It felt like my chest was caving in. I thought of our first date, how he told me he'd grown up in Seattle, that his father was a mechanic, his mother a nurse, how he'd shown me photos of his family home. Were those lies too? The next line hit harder. Sometimes I think about telling her, just to see if she'd still love me. But then I see the way she looks at me when I talk about the future, and I know I can't. She's in love with the man I invented. I closed the laptop again, but the words didn't leave my head. They followed me to bed, to the shower, to work. I started noticing details I'd never questioned before. The way he'd flinch when someone asked about his past. The way he avoided reunions. The way his hands trembled when old friends called. I realized that maybe I never truly knew the man I married. And worse, maybe he didn't want me to. But then, something inside me shifted. Grief gave way to a kind of quiet rage. I'd been lied to, built a life on a man who wasn't real, and now he was gone, leaving me with nothing but his ghosts and his passwords. I wasn't going to let that be the end, so I started digging. I searched for any mention of Ethan Matthews before 2011. Nothing. No records, no addresses, no school files. It was like he appeared out of nowhere. Then I searched for Anna, the woman he mentioned in the recording. After hours of scrolling, I found a small local news article from 2008, a missing persons report. Anna Lowell, 25, vanished from her apartment in Seattle. Last seen with a man described as mid-20s, brown hair, average build. No suspect named. The photo made my stomach twist. The man in the background blurred, indistinct, looked hauntingly familiar. Not clear enough to be sure, but enough to make my pulse race. Could it be him? I told myself it couldn't. I told myself there had to be another explanation, but the seed was planted. Doubt doesn't need proof, just possibility. That night, I listened to Voice 4. I thought I'd buried the past. I really did. But when I saw the news that she was gone, something broke in me. I wanted to turn myself in, but what would I say? That I didn't mean to hurt her? That I was trying to be someone else? The world doesn't forgive men like me, Claire. Maybe it shouldn't. I covered my mouth as if someone could hear me. Turn myself in? My heartbeat thundered in my ears. If you ever wonder who I was before, don't look for him. He's already dead. I became someone better. For you. The file ended. I sat motionless for what felt like hours. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The part of me that loved him was being slowly replaced by someone else, someone who needed answers more than comfort. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to be another woman who disappeared behind his lies. I was going to find out who he really was, who he was before. I started with his old laptop, the one he used before we married. It took me hours to get into it. When I finally cracked the password, there was a single folder on the desktop titled Archive. Inside were hundreds of photos, landscapes, faces, places I'd never seen. But one stood out. A photograph of Ethan, younger, hair longer, eyes the same. He was standing next to a woman with dark hair, smiling. The metadata on the photo said 2008 Seattle. Anna. I clicked the next photo. Same pair. Then the next, until the smiles began to fade. The last photo showed them standing apart, his face turned away, hers half out of frame. Then I noticed something else, a scanned document in the same folder. A police report. It was blurred, but one phrase was clear enough to read, questioned and released. No charges filed. I dropped the mouse. That night, I sat in the dark with the laptop open, staring at his digital ghost. The man I'd loved. The one who made pancakes on Sundays and left notes on the fridge he'd once been someone else entirely. Someone with a past that could fill a police report. But then another thought crept in. Maybe that's why he'd built this second life. Maybe the lies weren't meant to deceive me. Maybe they were meant to protect us both. I didn't know what to believe anymore. The world around me felt unreal, like living inside a story where I'd only just realized I wasn't the narrator. Then came the fifth recording. I didn't even hesitate this time. I pressed play. I never told you what the password means. Remember me, it's not about nostalgia. It's about guilt. Every lie I told had a reason. Every reason had a consequence. You were supposed to save me from it. Instead, I think I pulled you in. His voice cracked at the end. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't get to finish the last entry. Maybe that's better. Some endings aren't meant to be written. I felt something break inside me, not grief, not fear, but a sense of inevitability. Like I'd been walking toward this moment my whole life, without knowing it. The next morning, I drove to Seattle. I don't know what I was expecting. Closure, maybe, or confirmation that it was all some misunderstanding. But what I found was worse. I tracked down the detective listed on the old missing persons report. He was retired now, living outside the city. When I told him Ethan's name, he frowned. I remember that case, he said. The guy we talked to vanished right after the questioning. Changed everything. ID, address, the works. Smart guy. Never resurfaced. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely speak. What was his name? I asked. He looked through his notes, then said it slowly, like the name itself had weight. Daniel Hart. I felt dizzy. Daniel Hart. The name meant nothing and everything all at once. Ethan Matthews had never existed. The detective kept talking. Something about lack of evidence, how the case went cold. I barely heard him. All I could think about was how many years I'd spent sleeping beside a man whose name I didn't even know. When I drove back home that night, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. Every photo, every memory, every word between us felt counterfeit. But I didn't delete the folder. I couldn't, because as much as I hated him for lying, I still wanted to understand why. When I opened the laptop again, there was one final folder I hadn't noticed before, hidden inside Echoes, labeled simply Claire. Inside was a single file. It wasn't a recording or a diary entry. It was a letter. And it was addressed to me. I didn't open the letter right away. It sat there on my screen for hours. Its single line of text taunting me. To Claire. Even the way he wrote my name looked unfamiliar, like a stranger trying to copy his own handwriting. For a long time, I just stared at it. There's a moment after discovering a secret when the world doesn't break, yet it just tilts. Everything is still in place, but it's all a little wrong. That was me, sitting in the half-light of our living room, watching the cursor blink beside the word Claire, like a metronome measuring the slow collapse of the life I thought I understood. When I finally opened it, the letter began simply, "If you're reading this, it means you didn't stop when I asked you to. Maybe that's good. Maybe it's the only way you'll ever really know me." His voice, the rhythm of his words, came alive in my head. It wasn't a confession, not exactly. It was something softer and more dangerous. Explanation. "You always said truth was a kind of love. I wanted to give you that. But the truth about me isn't a single thing, it's a maze. I built walls around it so I wouldn't have to see the center again. You're standing in that maze now. If you keep walking, you'll lose the version of me you loved. But maybe you'll find the one who loved you back." I read that line over and over until it blurred. What did he mean, the one who loved me back? Wasn't that the same person? The letter continued. "I didn't change my name to hide from the law. I changed it to hide from myself. When I met you, I thought I could start over, erase the pieces that didn't fit. But erasing doesn't work. It just moves the cracks somewhere else." My throat tightened. He wasn't just talking about the past, he was talking about us. I left breadcrumbs because I knew one day you'd come looking. You always did. When you find the last file, you'll understand why I needed you to see the whole picture. Until then, remember this. What you remember isn't always what happened. That last line sank into me like a splinter. What you remember isn't always what happened. It sounded like something a hypnotist would say, or a warning. For days afterward, I couldn't trust anything. I'd pick up a photograph and question whether it had ever been taken the way I remembered it. Did we really spend that weekend at the coast, laughing in the rain, or had I filled in the laughter afterward? Did he ever actually tell me he loved me first? Memory became water, impossible to hold. At work, I started making mistakes. I'd call students by the wrong names, forget lessons I'd taught for years. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the classroom window and didn't recognize the woman staring back, tired, brittle, watching her own life from the outside. That night, I opened Echoes again. There was a new file. I hadn't added it. Its timestamp read today. For a second, I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I'd misread the date, or the computer had glitched. But when I opened it, the title made my skin crawl. Remember Me. It wasn't a diary entry. It was a single paragraph. You're almost there. The truth isn't hidden, it's forgotten. Check the place where we first said goodbye. I whispered the words aloud, trying to decode them. The place where we first said goodbye. Did he mean the hospital? The airport? Then it came to me, the lake house. The weekend before his mother's funeral, when we'd argued and he'd left early. We'd never talked about that fight again. In fact, now that I thought of it, I couldn't even remember why we'd fought. Just that he'd said, "We'll start over," and driven away. The next morning, I drove there. The lake house had been closed up for years. Dust thick on the windows, the key still on the same rusty hook. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and ghosts. Our old couch was still there, the throw blanket folded neatly, his habit, not mine. I stood in the silence until I could hear my heartbeat echo off the walls. Then I saw it, the small desk by the window, the one where he used to write emails. A single sheet of paper lay in the drawer. No date, no salutation, just handwriting his. If you found this, then you've started to forget too. I read it 3 times, pulse thudding in my ears. Forget what? Below that, another line. There's a drive hidden behind the picture frame. Don't trust what you see until you hear it. I turned to the wall. Our photo, the one from our first anniversary, hung there, crooked. Behind it, taped to the plaster, was a small flash drive wrapped in masking tape. My hands were shaking as I pulled it free. Back home, I plugged it into the laptop. Another folder appeared, titled Horizon. Inside were 2 files, Audio 7 and Audio 8. He'd said there were 6 recordings before. These were new. I clicked Audio 7. If you're listening, Claire, then you've started to feel it. The gaps, the missing hours, the memories that don't line up. It isn't your fault. I needed you to forget. My stomach nodded. You once told me people only survive trauma by rewriting it. Maybe that's what I did to us. Maybe that's what you're doing now. But what if our whole life together was just the rewrite? I stopped the playback, heart hammering. He wasn't accusing me. He was including me. What if it wasn't just his past that was false? What if mine had been shaped by his stories until I couldn't tell where his version ended and mine began? I pressed play again. You'll start to remember things that feel wrong. Let them. That's the only way back. I didn't understand what back meant, but I wanted to. I wanted to know everything, even if it shattered me. The second file, Audio 8, was shorter. The diary ends with you, Claire. Not because you were my secret, but because you were my mirror. Every lie I told, you believed because you needed to. I think we both did. When you find the last password, you'll see that the truth was never about me. Then silence. Not even the sound of him breathing. I sat there until the computer screen dimmed. Then I whispered to the empty room. Then what is it about? The cursor blinked once, twice, then the folder closed itself. I don't know if it was a glitch or something he'd programmed, but the timing felt deliberate, almost theatrical. For days afterward, I felt like I was moving through fog. Objects looked familiar, but slightly misplaced. I'd find my keys in the freezer, my phone in the washing machine. Sometimes I'd wake up on the couch with the laptop open to a file I didn't remember opening. The boundary between remembering and imagining had dissolved. That's when I started recording myself. Just short notes on my phone, where I went, what I did, what time it was. If Ethan could leave behind a map of his truth, maybe I could make one of mine. Each night I'd listen back, and sometimes, just sometimes, I'd hear something in the background. A click, a breath, a whisper too faint to catch. It sounded like my own voice saying my name. I told myself it was interference, but part of me wondered if it was something else, the echo of a memory trying to surface. One evening, scrolling through the old diary entries again, I noticed something I'd missed before, a pattern in the dates. The first letter of each file, titled DMCAF, spelled DMCAF. At first, it meant nothing. Then I realized it was an acronym Ethan used for his investment clients. Don't make conclusions about fragments. He'd said it once at dinner, laughing about how people panic when they only see part of a chart. Fragments. Maybe that was the point of all this, to remind me that I only had fragments. That the full picture could look entirely different. The next morning, I opened a new document and began writing everything from the start. How we met, how he died, what I'd found. But as I wrote, something strange happened. Details changed on the page. I'd type, "He proposed at the lake," and the words would rearrange themselves into, "He never proposed." My fingers froze above the keys. I wasn't sure if it was the computer or my mind betraying me. I shut the laptop. I couldn't trust technology anymore. I couldn't even trust myself. That night, I dreamed of the ocean, the same one from his first diary entry. He was there, standing at the edge of the water, calling my name. When I reached him, he looked at me and said, "You finally remembered." Then I woke up, heart racing, sheets damp with sweat. The next morning, a single notification appeared on my phone. Password attempt successful, echoes accessed. But I hadn't opened it. Someone or something had. When I checked, the entire folder was empty, except for one new document titled The End, Beginning. No date, no author, just text. There are no final passwords, Claire. There's only what you choose to believe. The rest, the names, the past, the truth, they were never mine alone. They were ours. And beneath that, one final line. EMDHCM. My initials beside his. Merged. Indistinguishable. That's when I realized the cruelest part of the truth. Ethan didn't just rewrite his life. He rewrote mine with it. And now, every memory I have of us is both real and false at the same time. Sometimes I think about deleting everything, wiping the drives, burning the notebooks, starting over. But then I remember his last words. The truth was never about me. Maybe he meant that it's about what we do with it, whether we let it define us or free us. So I keep the files. All of them, not as proof of who he was, but as evidence that I existed too, that my version of our story, fractured as it is, still matters. When people ask if I've moved on, I smile and say yes. But at night, when the house is quiet and the screen glows faintly in the dark, I open Echoes again. The folder's empty now, but sometimes I swear I can hear a faint sound, a breath between words, a whisper shaped like my name. And I whisper back, not out of longing, but recognition. Because in the end, maybe that's what truth really is. Two people remembering the same life differently, and both of them being right. They tell you that after loss comes healing, but no one warns you that healing can look a lot like erasure. A year has passed since I found the folder. A year of quiet mornings that feel borrowed, of afternoons where the world still tilts a few degrees to the left. The house is lighter now. I sold half the furniture, repainted the walls, removed the photos. But even stripped bare, the rooms remember. Sometimes the light hits the hallway just right, and I can almost see him, Ethan, Daniel, whoever he was crossing the floor with a mug of coffee and that soft, distracted smile that made me believe everything was ordinary. I don't open Echoes anymore. Not because I'm afraid of what's inside, but because it no longer needs me. The files are still there, untouched, frozen in time, like an exhibit I've already visited too many times. What remains now is the slow work of rebuilding, deciding which fragments of my life belong to me and which were written by someone else's hand. The first step was my name. I kept Matthews, at least for now. It's strange, but the false name he gave the world has become the truest part of my story. Every signature, every introduction, every letter addressed to Claire Matthews is proof of the years that really happened, no matter what he called himself. The second step was smaller, remembering how to live without watching myself live. For months, I couldn't trust my own thoughts. I'd reread text messages, replay conversations, checking for inconsistencies that only I could hear. Then one morning, while making coffee, I realized I'd forgotten to think about him for an entire hour. It terrified me and freed me in the same breath. Teaching helped. Standing in front of a classroom again, I could anchor myself in facts, dates, grammar, sentences that stayed the same no matter who spoke them. My students don't know that their quiet attention saves me. When they hand in essays about memory and identity, I smile at the irony. Still, the mind has its own weather. There are days when I catch a familiar scent, cedar, rain, burnt toast, and for a heartbeat, I'm back inside his world. The difference is that now I know how to return. I've learned that memory doesn't own me unless I let it. I visit the lake house once a month. It's become less of a shrine and more of a laboratory, a place where I study the past like an archaeologist examining ruins. The waterline has receded, exposing stones we used to skip across. I stand there and practice something my therapist calls restorying. You take the same memory and tell it again until it stops hurting. The first few times it felt like lying. Now it feels like rewriting truth in my own handwriting. One afternoon, while cleaning the old desk, I found another envelope wedged behind the drawer. Not a letter this time, just a photograph. I was in it, standing on that same deck, sunlight on my face. Ethan was behind the camera. On the back, he'd written one line, "See yourself as I saw you." For a long time, I couldn't decide whether it was comfort or manipulation. Maybe both, but I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk anyway. It reminds me that even false stories can hold real moments. People keep telling me to move on, but I think that phrase misunderstands the process. You don't move on from the past, you move with it, until the weight shifts from anchor to compass. The photograph stayed above my desk for weeks before I noticed what was hiding in the corner of the frame. My own reflection in the window, faint but visible, as if the camera had caught me watching myself. That detail became a metaphor I couldn't ignore. Maybe the point of all this was to learn how to be both the subject and the observer of my own life, to see and to keep seeing, even when the picture is uncomfortable. Reconstruction isn't dramatic. It's made of small, quiet decisions. I started gardening not because I love plants, but because they refuse to hurry. They remind me that growth is mostly invisible, roots first, blossoms later. Every time I press a seed into the soil, I think about passwords and how they used to unlock his secrets. Now, the only passwords I keep are ordinary. The alarm code, my email, the gate to the garden. Simple locks for an uncomplicated life. Sometimes former colleagues ask about Ethan. I give them the edited version. Heart attack, sudden, tragic. People nod, offer sympathy, and we move on. The truth, the real, sprawling, half-imagined truth belongs to me alone. I don't owe it to anyone who wasn't inside it. One evening after a long day at school, I opened a blank document and typed a single sentence. The story ends when she decides it does. It felt like defiance. Then I began writing not about him, but about the woman who kept living after the revelation. Fiction, maybe. Therapy disguised as literature. The words came easier than I expected. When I finished the first chapter, I realized I'd gone 3 hours without checking the clock or the past. That night I dreamed of the lake again, only this time I was alone. The water was calm, the sky unbroken. I waited for him to appear at the edge of the dock, but no one came. Instead, I heard my own voice say, "You can go now." When I woke up, I understood. The dream wasn't a visitation. It was permission. Spring arrived early that year. I invited a few friends to the lake house for the first time since everything happened. We drank coffee on the porch, laughed about nothing, and watched the sun climb over the water. When they left, I stayed behind and opened my notebook. On the first page, I wrote his real name, Daniel Hart, then crossed it out. Beneath it, I wrote my own, bold and unbroken. I didn't delete echoes. It sits on an external drive in my desk, sealed away like a time capsule. Maybe someday I'll open it again, or maybe it will stay untouched until technology forgets how to read it. Either way, it's part of the record, proof that two people once tried to reinvent themselves and almost succeeded. These days, I measure time differently, not by anniversaries or losses, but by ordinary milestones. The day the magnolia bloomed, the night I slept without dreaming, the morning I woke up and reached for sunlight instead of a screen. Sometimes, while grading papers, I ask my students to define truth in a single sentence. Their answers vary. Truth is fact. Truth is feeling. Truth is what's left when the lies fall away. I never tell them mine. My version is simpler. Truth is the story you keep after you stop needing it to hurt. I close the notebook, switch off the light, and let the house fall quiet. Outside, the wind moves through the trees like a memory I no longer have to chase. Somewhere in that stillness, I imagine him smiling not as a ghost or a mystery, but as a chapter finished cleanly on the page. And for the first time since it all began, I don't reach for a password. I reach for sleep, and it opens.